With the popularity of disco finally starting to wane and technology leaping ahead year by year, it was inevitable the arcades would reach their pinnacle in this decade, the time of big hair and access. If the 70s was the invention of video games, then the 80s would be that vision finally coming to fruition. And it was all on the back of pinball, whose 3 balls equals 3 lives, flashy lights and sounds, and high scores equals extra lives had all been translated into the new video medium. But this is where video arcades would leave the pins in the dust and be the go-to entertainment for the kids of the 80s. The 70s pushed technology further with almost every game release, and in turn 1980 would bring many new features to arcades that will become standards for years to come. The Deco cassette system was developed by Data East as a standardized arcade system, making it possible to load different games from cassette into arcade RAM chips, thus allowing you to change out games daily. The games took on average a few minutes to load, just like old cassette gaming on my beloved Commodore 64. Roughly 40 to 50 games were released this way up until 1985, before the system was discontinued. Some notable game releases on the system were Lock and Chase, Burger Time, and Burning Rubber. Another new introduction was synthesized voices or samples into a game called Speak and Rescue, as it was called in Japan. This game was later released as Stratovox by Taito in North America. It's a simple variation on a bit of Space Invaders and Galaxian styles, but the inclusion of voice samples made it a first for arcade games, and it would become more and more popular as the 80s progressed.
We had an arcade in the neighborhood that was about maybe a 3 or 4 minute bike ride away. It was called Just for Fun, and it was an absolute blast. This was probably 1980, 1981, 1982, right in that range that I spent a lot of time down there. And I distinctly remember busting into the piggy bank and taking out exactly 100 pennies and putting them in like a Ziploc bag, bringing them down to the arcade, putting them on the counter. And at this arcade, they used tokens instead of quarters. So we get 10 tokens for $1. I could play for an hour or so on those. It was an absolute blast. They would look at me funny when I brought them all the pennies though.
Now let's flip our attention to the games of 1980, and first up was Phoenix, published by Taito in Japan. Another one of my dad and I's favorite games to play together. It's a space shooter in the Galaxian mold, but still different and unique in its own right, featuring 5 stages where you have to blast alien Phoenix birds or eggs before they hatch. You're also equipped with a shield which can be activated to save you from fire or fry close flying objects. I love the unpredictable nature of the enemy patterns, and this game also features one of the first examples of an end of game boss battle where you have to blast a hole right through the final brain alien's UFO. Next was another space shooter in the form of Mooncrester, released by Nichibutsu, who were founded in 1970 with their headquarters being in Kita, Osaka, Japan. Like so many of these companies before them, they started by selling arcades, but made their official arcade debut in 1978 with a clone of Breakout called Table Attacker. Mooncrester though was one of their first big hits. It featured unique elements like the 3 pieces of your ship representing your lives, upgrades to your weapons the further you got, which involved docking with new pieces to increase your firepower. It was fun, but really hard, and was followed by a bunch of sequels such as 1985's Terra Cresta and a 3D version, Terra Cresta 3D, in 1997 for the Sega Saturn, which was their last published game. Midway then gave us Wizard of War, developed by Nutting Associates, with David Nutting himself being one of the designers. This unique maze-style shooter included a 2-player mode where you can either team up and kill the creatures or blast your opponent and the monsters, featuring excellent use of speech samples, addictive gameplay, varied enemies, and a gradual learning curve made it really fun to get into. I used to play this a lot on my Commodore 64 with my next door neighbor, and we absolutely loved it. It was a great conversion. Another game in a similar style but equally addictive was Berserk by Stern. Berserk essentially is a maze shoot 'em up, with the goal of each screen is to kill all the robots as fast as possible and exit the level. Gameplay employs randomly generated levels with you trying to last as long as you can and rack up those points. More kills means the robots get smarter and more aggressive, with the difficulty ramping up pretty quickly. But that one more go trope is alive and well, making it quite an addictive game. Just like a few other games this year, Berserk is absolutely jam-packed with speech samples, so as soon as you walked into an arcade back then and heard that crazy robot chatter, you just had to go and investigate. Now let's check out Atari, who had 3 massive releases this year and coming off their hot streak of Lunar Lander and Asteroids in '79. Let's start off with Centipede, another Ed Logg design game, which was a single screen shooter where you had to blast a centipede making its way down towards you. You also had to deal with other bugs like spiders, fleas and scorpions, each bringing their own set of problems to deal with in this fast-paced game. The use of a trackball control method was really what made this game stand apart, as you could move extremely fast and be very accurate once you got used to it, leading to mega points on the high score table. The game was followed by a sequel, Millipede, in 1982. Missile Command was next, a game designed by Dave Thera, who would do another few big hits for Atari in the next few years. But for now, Missile Command is a fixed screen strategy shooter where you had to defend your cities from a nuclear attack by shooting down the missiles before they nuked the surface. No doubt inspired by the rising tensions of the Cold War at the time. Again, using a trackball to perfect effect, it was a test of quick thinking and pinpoint accuracy. If all your cities are nuked, it's game over. It's very simplistic and addictive. It's what Atari just did best. And their third game was Battlezone, a first-person tank shooter that made excellent use of its 3D vector graphics. The cabinet design really sucked you into the experience with the double control method from 74's Tank and that viewfinder periscope you had to look through to play the game. I remember my dad having to hold me up to the viewfinder to play this for the first time.
Battlezone was another game that was great. I was only small, so I used to have to stand up on a step or this crate, milk crate, to be able to look through and play Battlezone.
And I was completely blown away. I had just watched Tron on VHS, so this was like living the movie. Although it was a few years later, after its release, it was still extremely impressive. In the game, you roam a planet's surface blasting other tanks and UFOs for bonus points. You use the radar to seek and destroy. This game is also notable as being the first big successful 3D game, and not only that, the original first-person 3D shooter. Space Firebird was another early Nintendo clone game, taking elements of other games in the genre like Galaxians and mashing them together with a few unique elements. It was in the single-screen space shooter genre that was hugely popular in the late 70s to early 80s. You have to blast the space Firebirds as they buzz around the screen, dodging and shooting. Plus you have access to a shield system which can be used once per level, or to fry some birds until it runs out. You also have to take out the deadly incoming missiles that one shot explode into shrapnel, which you need to avoid. It's a good bit of simple fun and a forgotten footnote for Nintendo before they really found their footing with their original concept in Donkey Kong the following year. And 1980s hits just keep on coming as Namco dropped 2 classics to round out this year. First was Rally X, a maze-style racing game where you had to drive your race car through a maze, picking up all the yellow flags while avoiding all the other cars. You had a radar map for help and a smoke screen you could deploy to incapacitate incoming cars at the expense of your fuel tank. The game was very successful in Japan, becoming the 6th highest grosser of 1980, but in North America the game was a complete failure, selling less than 2,500 cabinets. In retrospect though, the game has become very well loved and respected and is included on almost every Namco compilation I can think of. The game is also credited as the first arcade game to have continuous background music throughout play as well as a bonus stage. Both of these things would become standards in almost every arcade game over the next couple of years. And now the big one. Pac-Man, a game like Space Invaders that became a complete pop culture phenomenon. It was Namco's first major hit, and it was a game by Toru Iwatani, who designed Namco's first arcade game, GB, as well as Rally X and Pole Position. He wanted to make something that everyone could play together and attract that non-existent female market to the fold. Simple, colorful characters, bubbly sound, and the non-reliance of killing of aliens. Its fun-natured and addictive charm won everyone over. With its simple to pick up up and play Maze Mechanics. Catchy music, at least all 5 seconds of it, and those iconic sound effects. It was an instant smash, at least in the US. It didn't actually fare that well initially in Japan, the complete opposite story of Rally X. The media had an absolute frenzy with this game. It even spawned its own record release with Pac-Man Fever. The game was basic and addictive. Eat all the pellets in a level while avoiding the ghosts. Eat a power pellet, making the ghost vulnerable, buying you time to either finish off a level or eat the ghost as bonus points. It was this addictiveness that managed to bring in the female audience, as well as everybody in between.
Video games are the fastest growing new form of entertainment in America today. People are pumping millions of quarters into video games across the nation each and every week. We spoke to some local players and asked them why.
Well, I like them because it works with the mind. And it just inspires me. Oh, it does.
In what ways?
It makes me feel good. Just that I can win.
It's also cited as the first game to have cutscenes between certain levels, as well as establishing the now time-honored tradition of a mascot character for a certain company. And finally, we have Space Panic, published by Universal in 1980 in the arcades. It's considered to be the first platform game, predating Donkey Kong. Just don't break it to those Nintendo fanboys. You know they're gonna go mental over it. The game involves you as an astronaut taking out aliens on single fixed screen levels. You could climb up and down ladders, dig holes for the creatures to fall into, and then smash them in the head to finish off the job, dropping them down a level to their death. The stronger the alien, the bigger the fall needed to waste them. And that's where I guess the panic in the game's title comes from, as the game can get really intense very fast as the alien count and strength increase from level to level gets higher, requiring greater heart drops to kill them for good. The arcade game was a big hit in Japan, but failed miserably in arcades outside its native country. It was part of a long line of successful games that Kazutoshi Ueda worked on in the 1980s, which also included Mr. Do and Bomb Jack. The game only received one port outside of Japan to the ColecoVision in 1982, where again it received lukewarm results, but its effects were evident in the gaming scene, with countless clones hitting every system under the sun, including the C64 clones, Panic 64 and Panic Planet, and was no doubt the inspiration for Broderbund's computer classic Lode Runner.